All right, it's working.
You good to go?
Perfect.
Yep, please go ahead.
Sure. So my name is Ari. I'm the founder of Lava Financial. I've been a developer for the past 4 years. I really got into crypto in 2017 during the first major bull run. I wasn't really focused on Solidity or working my own project at that time, and the tooling actually wasn't as good back then. But in 2020, I started by making my first project, which was an NFT project. It wasn't huge by any means and didn't really have a lot of utility, but I really got my feet wet then. And later on in 2021, when nodes started to become very popular, this is when Ring came onto the scene around November, December. I saw that the node model, could be promising, but I noticed that there were a lot of flaws with it. So I had the idea to take, some of the elements of the node model, which is mainly locking up, tokens in return for, a daily reward, but tweak it so that it could be more sustainable. And my idea was instead of having the model work where users have to buy a native token and then they're receiving the same native token, which they then have to sell, which only causes significant sell pressure. What we would do essentially, we would invest the money in our treasury in various investments, and then we would actually distribute those assets from the investments we made to the actual users. So people would be able to take profit in the form of the actual investments that the treasury is making, rather than having to sell the native token, which is the same token that they're buying with. And that's the classic Ponzi-nomic model that most node projects operate on. So our idea, you can essentially think of as a revenue share model, where users are actually receiving a portion of all the investments that the treasury is making. And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to know. So that means that there is no fixed ROI. So the investors get the fruits of your own investments, which can vary quite a lot. And it's it does mean less safety short term, but also more sustainability, I guess.
Yeah. So the way that it works is that essentially the returns are determined by the productive investments that the treasury actually makes, and those include our sister projects as well as the actual seed level investments that we're making through our partner 6K. And essentially users are entitled to a share of the profits of the treasury in proportion to the number of nodes that they have relative to the total amount of nodes that are being created. So it's really in proportionate to the share of your nodes. But yeah, the rates aren't fixed in that case, and they're determined by the underlying investments that we're actually making. And especially with our private investments, often there's a lockup period attached, as well as a vesting schedule. So the way that it works in this case is, say we make a private investment in project, let's call it project A, and let's say there's a 3-month lockup, and then there's a 6-month linear vest. Essentially, based on the nodes that you own relative to the total supply of nodes, you'd be entitled to a share of that particular investment, and essentially you would be able to claim your tokens from that project based on your share as the vesting kicks in. So as vesting kicks in, you'd be able to claim it directly, from the front end. And again, that the vesting schedule varies depending on the project.
So it means that if an investor is holding some Lava nodes, they are benefiting from your kind of financial power and expertise to enter some seed rounds that as a singular or unique investor, they probably wouldn't be able to access.
Exactly, because typically especially at the stage that we're making these investments in, usually there's seed level investments. Typically, they're only reserved for VCs or large accredited investors. Um, Typically, when retail is buying into these projects pre-launch, they're usually at later rounds where the tokens are actually valued at a much higher multiple than the seed round, and they're usually investing via a launch pad, which means that they're not actually guaranteed an allocation. Typically, how launch pads work is you stake their token and then you get entered into a lottery in order to receive your allocation, but there isn't a guarantee that you're actually going to receive any allocation at all there. In this case, you can kind of think of it as the launchpad model, where you're essentially, you have a fixed investment or a fixed initial investment, which is a node in this case, and essentially by holding that node, you're guaranteed an allocation, in proportion to the total supply of nodes in all future investments that are made. So it's almost like a fairer version of the launchpad kind of system.
Yeah, to me, it feels like, I mean, I understand that it's that Lava is classified as a node, but in a way, it feels like closer to a hedge fund that would be kind of crowdfunded than a node, in the sense that maybe 99% of the nodes will pay you in their native tokens at a rate of 0.5 or 1 or 2% per day. But with you, it's very different. It's more like it really makes me think of some kind of crowdfunding.
Yeah, exactly. It is pretty. I would say that is an apt way to describe the direction that we're heading in. But the reason that I guess we've branded ourselves as Node is because initially, for phase one, where we're actually bootstrapping the treasury, the actual daily rewards, as well as the way to actually buy the nodes, are with our native token Lava. So phase one is a node project, so that's why we've sort of approached, that's why we sort of marketed ourselves this way. But yeah, you're absolutely correct in that the subsequent phases where Lava gets phased out and the returns are only coming from productive investments, from the treasury. I guess it would be more appropriate to, I guess, view that as a crowd-funded, VC or just a crowd fund, a revenue sharing crowd fund. But yeah.
And can you give us a timeline as to the transition from phase one to phase two?
Yeah. So right now we're at the very early stages of phase two, and how that look is. So we've made our first two private investments. The first was in the Standard, which is a over collateralized stablecoin project. They're building the tooling and infrastructure to allow other projects, and even countries to issue their own stablecoins. Their first stablecoin will be focused on the euro, and I don't think there are many euro-backed stablecoins right now.
No, there are.
Yeah. So what they're doing, I'm pretty excited about what they're doing, and yeah, they're using an over collateralized model, so you have to have at least 120%, between 120 and 150% in order to actually mint their stablecoin, which is S Euro. So that was our first investment. Our second investment was in Partizo, which is a multi-platform computing layer one, so it allows multiple parties to operate on the same set of data securely. That's a project that I'm pretty excited about. And then there are a bunch that have come our way since then that we're looking into. So truth be told, the majority of investment opportunities that come our way, we pass on, or pass over, I should say, for one reason or another. Usually, it has to do with the actual team behind these projects, the vesting terms, as well as the I guess total addressable market. So there are a lot of factors that go into us analyzing our investments. But yeah, to answer your question, as to where we are with phase two, as soon as vesting begins for the actual investments that we've already made, users will be able to claim their allocation directly from our DApp. And as the amount of these private investments increase, and people are receiving more and more rewards for these investments that we're making, the actual amount of lava that they're receiving daily will begin to be adjusted and go down proportionally. So as rewards from private investments go up, or returns from private investments go up, the actual emission for lava will be going down. And then the idea is to get to a point where we fully transition away from lava, and the treasury based on its private investments as well as sister projects becomes self-sufficient, and essentially people are only the rewards that people are receiving are only coming from investments, as well as the royalties from our sister projects, which we can get into.
Can you say more on the sister projects, because I've seen them mentioned on your website, but I haven't seen more details.
For sure. So essentially, the way the sister projects work is that we'll be seeding these projects initially. These are ideas that we've come up with. We'll be assembling the team, but they'll be run completely independent of Lava. So they'll have their own finance. They'll be responsible for managing their own finances. They'll have their own community. They'll have their own team. Their own leadership, and essentially they'll be completely responsible for their projects. And you can essentially view us as as just providing the initial funding, and in return for our involvement early on, we'll be receiving a royalty percentage from future revenues, which will go back to our treasury. Because the idea is that obviously we want to receive a return based on the investment that we're making by getting these projects off the ground, but we also want them to reinvest any revenue they're generating back into the project so that they can continue to grow. And as I said before, these projects, they operate completely independently from Lava. So when it comes to how they choose, when it comes to how they approach funding, that's that'll work on a case-by-case basis, and that'll be up to the team. So if they want to raise funds by approaching VCs, that's completely up to them, and that'll depend on what their needs are. So the first sister project is Project Athena, and what it is essentially a DeFi strategy automation platform, as well as unified dashboard. So the way that it works is kind of like if this then that, or I don't know if you're familiar with if this then that, but basically users will be able to essentially take DeFi primitives, right, like swapping, adding liquidity, bridging, and they'll be able to chain them together using those basic primitive building blocks to build high-level strategies, and then they'll be able to run them automatically based on event-based triggers or time-based triggers. And the platform will also have social features. So if you're not much of an expert, but you have a sense of some of the strategies that you'd like to employ, you'll have a feed. There'll essentially be a home section on the DApp with a feed of strategies recommended to each user, and most of these strategies will have been created by other users on the platform, but you'll be able to employ them on your own. And and if you have the knowledge, you'll also be able to modify them. So that's one part of Athena. The other part is the actual unified dashboard, which is somewhat similar to ApeBoard and DBank, where users will be able to view all their positions, to view and manage all their positions in a unified place. So that's pretty cool. And then the other part of Athena is essentially the third-party API access. So we'll actually be opening up the platform to other projects to use. So if they want to build their own dashboard or add information to their front end, they'll be able to use our API to actually pull in this information, and they can either use a read-only API where they're basically just pulling in information on display, or they can use the API that actually powers Block Builder, which is the automation platform I was telling you about, so that they can actually use webhooks to basically run I guess run certain to take certain actions based on any triggers that they choose to define. So that could be something like that could be a time-based trigger where they choose to do a buyback every day at a particular time, so they'd be able to use our API in order to do that.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking that, of course, for individual investors, it's both quite useful and convenient because I guess it can save time on creating some Excel documents to track your own investments and so on. But I also think that for organizations such as Wand, we are organizing because everything will happen on multi-signatures. So it's any kind of trading or activity is quite it's quite a pain in the ass, to be honest. But if we have some kind of automated strategies, then it all becomes much more convenient, and it can also allow us to be more responsive to the market. And of course, it's
exactly, and because right now, especially when it comes to these high-level strategies where there are multiple steps involved, most of the time that's being done manually by users. And that could be something just like looping, for instance, where you're basically so people don't do it now. People aren't doing it as much anymore. But I don't know if you remember the Gembox through what should I call it?
Digit Box Abracadabra with Wonderlines. Yeah.
So you would have to. So when that was popular, you would have to manually, go through every step of depositing, borrowing, until you reach your desired leverage. With our block builder, which accepts inputs and also supports callbacks, you would be able to deploy that strategy with a click. If the strategy already existed, you'd be able to deploy it with a click of a button. But the idea is to incentivize people to create their own strategies, which other people then use, as well as allow people to edit existing strategies. And as I said before, these run automatically in response to certain events, or just based on time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What is the incentive for users to actually create those strategies?
So users will essentially be rewarded based on the usage for the strategies. We're still fleshing out the exact numbers and the way the model will work, but generally, so the idea that we have is we'll charge a small nominal fee for people who actually use the automations. It might be like 0.01% or something small of the amount that they're depositing to actually run a particular strategy. So the users who actually create strategies will be receiving a percentage of the actual revenue that the platform generates. And we don't know if we want to actually create a native token for the platform, because I don't know if there's much of a need in that case. But yeah, the idea is that users will be compensated for creating strategies, and that'll incentivize them to to publish them on the platform and for other people to use them. And then when it comes to actually generating revenue, one of the other ideas that we had is to essentially allow for sponsored strategies on the homepage. And the way this will work is, say you're a new project, right? And you want people to use your platform, or you want to generate exposure. What you can essentially do is you can come up with your own automation, right? For whatever your platform is doing. Let's say if you're like a stablecoin platform, or you can stake and recompound, whatever it is, you can create your strategy and then pay Athena a monthly fee in order to display your strategy as a sponsored strategy on the actual homepage, and this way, people will be, it'll bring more exposure to your project, and people will while it isn't a guarantee that people actually use your platform, it'll certainly bring more awareness to it, and if people do use it, then obviously that's quite beneficial.
Yeah, and if you can lower the threshold for an investor to start using the platform of a partner that would pay you in their, well, from the marketing budget, I suppose. I mean, I do think that lowering the threshold to entry is extremely important in DeFi because it's like we can see that quite often investors will not go on certain investment opportunities because it's not on the chain that they prefer. But at the end of the day, going cross-chain is fairly easy. The only reason is that we just don't want to spend time on some kind of mundane tasks. So if you can offer some pre-made strategies that are optimized for your partners, your marketing partners, it's something quite powerful.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the way it works is that we're tapping into the ABIs for any contracts that are available for a given project, and those essentially, and each block can either can call whatever methods are available for the contracts that are published, and then essentially the output of the functions that are called can then get redirected to other blocks, and those other blocks are usually some of the primitives that I described before, like swapping, staking, depositing, and borrowing, bridging, etc.
Okay. And I also see on your roadmap that you have Project Flora. Can you say something about it?
Yeah, so Project Flora. So I actually refer to that project as Prism now. Essentially, the way that'll work is it'll be cross-chain staking with zero impermanent loss. And the way that it'll work is users will essentially be able to stake native assets paired with the wrap version of that same asset across on other chains, so that they're essentially, if you let's say you have Polygon, you have native Polygon Matic, and you plan on holding it anyways, you'd essentially be able to stake it on our platform by pairing it with the wrap version of that same asset across other chains in return for our reward token on the platform. And what this does is it builds up deep cross-chain liquidity for blue chip assets like AVAX, Phantom, Matic, BNB, and on top of the liquidity that we built up, we'll have a swap feature so people can can bridge assets across these chains pretty seamlessly. But the main idea here is cross-chain farming with no impermanent loss for the user. So and I imagine this will be quite popular, especially as people become more risk averse based on the market conditions that we're seeing now. Because if you have an asset that you believe in, and it could be something like AVAX, and you're planning on holding long term, something like this will allow you to leverage the asset that you plan on holding anyways with almost no additional risk, because you're just pairing it with the wrap version of the asset, which the same price, and which is for all intents and purposes the same thing. It's just the wrap version on a different chain.
Okay, so it's a bit like you can stake ETH with WETH on the platform, and then you get some fees whenever there is a trade between ETH and WETH, and you don't have impermanent loss because the two will always move in the same direction.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and you might also when it comes to actually swapping, we may enable swapping between different pairs. So let's say wrap ETH. So let's say it's native ETH to let's say wrap Polygon on AVAX or wrap Matic on AVAX. So we haven't fully decided if we want to support something like that, but in theory there shouldn't really be an issue there. But the one of the challenging things is when you're building a bridge is actually guaranteeing that there's enough liquidity on the other chains for the wrap version of the asset. So what we would also do is we would incentivize people to provide liquidity of the wrap version of the asset paired with a stable coin, most likely USDC, and the rewards for those pools will be much higher than the rewards for the pools that have no permanent loss. But something like that is necessary because you need to ensure that there's enough actual liquidity when people are using the bridge and swapping, because they're probably going to want to sell out once they've actually bridged onto the target chain. But so that's one way we'll approach that. And then another thing we'll do is we'll take a percentage of the transaction fees that we generate every time a swap is done, and then we'll use that to add to the liquidity for each of our pools, basically.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you may know that we're working on space dev, so all the topics around the swapping and bridging are quite something I'm interesting in nowadays.
Yeah.
Do you guys like in the audience, do you guys have any questions that you would like to ask in particular to the Lava team? I know there has been one question a bit earlier. Yeah. So yeah, Meta wanted some links to the investment that you have made. There is the standard and Partisia blockchain. Are there other projects that you have invested in?
So at the moment, no. At the moment, we've actually been looking at a few other potential private investment opportunities, but we haven't announced anything yet because we haven't actually made the investment. But there are several projects that are on our radar right now. So one other thing that we'll be doing, and while we actually, rather than just letting the treasury sit idle, one thing we'll most likely be doing is depositing at least a portion of their treasury into the Curve 3 pool, which is based on the three big stablecoins. I think it's DAI, USDC, and Frax. And the rewards aren't huge, but at least if you just by using that pool, you're using that pool is better than letting the treasury sit idle, because you're still generating like 4 or 5% per year, with minimal risk in that case. But yeah, right now we're more we're fielding 3 or 4 projects right now. 2 of them are layer ones. One of them is a utility focused NFT project, but we haven't made the actual investment yet, so we haven't announced in that case. And then, as you know, we're working on the sister projects, on the 2 sister projects behind the scenes.
And speaking of which, Joao asked, what is the ETA for the sister projects?
So it's hard to say, and it depends on which project, but our plan is to have a minimum viable product ready for use and a beta release for Athena within the next 1.5 to 2 months, with a full-fledged release containing all the features that we've described probably in the next 3 months. And for Prism, I would say the timeline is also pretty similar. The plan is to get the plan is to get a beta out within the next also 1.5 months, and to have something, to have a general release, and to have all features available within the next 3 to 3.5 months.
And are you concerned about the market conditions for the launch of Prism and Athena?
So for Athena, not really, because it doesn't depend on a native token. It essentially is an interface that's built on top of every other DeFi platform, because essentially, as long as there's an ABI available and the contracts are public, then people will be able to tap into them and use our automation platform. But there is no native token actually attached to the platform, so I'm not really worried about that. And as long as people are still participating in DeFi in general, then I'm confident that we'll see some traction on our platform there. With Prism, it's a little different because there is an actual token that people receive in exchange for providing liquidity. But regardless of market conditions, the most important thing to do is build and move forward. If we have to revise our tokenomics just because of I guess where the market is at, then that's something that we'll just have to do, and because you have to be flexible if you want to be successful, especially with the number of unknowns out there. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty confident in both of them, and I'm not so worried about Prism, because like I said before, the reward token you receive is based on providing is based on essentially staking your native asset with the wrapped asset. So I imagine that people will be willing to do that regardless of market conditions, because there's no impermanent loss in that case. So if you have something like like Matic, and let's say we're in the depths of the bear market, and the price action isn't looking great. So just by holding is not just holding your assets and doing nothing might not be optimal. So what I imagine many people will do is they'll be attracted to the idea of potentially using assets that they intend to hold anyways, and in return for this, they'll be receiving a reward. But one thing that has to be fleshed out a bit more is the actual, if you're rewarding people with a native token, then obviously they're encouraged to sell, or they're incentivized to sell. So we're also exploring a VE style system where people can essentially lock up their future rewards in return for a greater share of the actual revenue made, as well as maybe increased governance power to determine some of the rates on the pools that we offer. But yeah, I mean, like I said, with Prism, I'm not as worried, because the idea isn't really the idea is for people to provide existing assets rather than buy into the new token, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And what would you recommend as the best strategy to invest on Lava Financial?
The best strategy?
Yeah, like if an investor is interested in Lava Financial, or how?
So yeah, I would say that if it depends on your goals, but if you're interested long term in being able to participate in the private investments that we're making, and you want to maximize your allocation, I would say go for the Nova, which is the tier 3 node, which provides you the largest allocation of these private investments, and take profits probably once or twice per month, but compound to maximize your allocation, essentially.
By compounding, you mean with the lava token, that the native token that is being rewarded, and not the ones that come from the private investments? Or
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
okay, all right,
Exactly.
okay. Um, do you guys have some other questions, or maybe a topic about lava that we haven't addressed yet? Because to me, it's pretty clear. Um,
Do you have anything else that you wanted to?
Well, there is actually one question about the governance. What is the community involved in? How do they participate to make some decisions?
For your question was on governance.
Yes.
So yeah, the way that it works is every time users create a node, they're airdropped glava, and that glava represents their voting power, and users can make proposals or vote on existing proposals using snapshot.org, and they can vote based on their holdings of glava.
And what are the kind of decisions that they can vote upon?
So our first decision was on true ROI. Generally, it'll have to most of the time it'll have to do with decisions when it comes to actually changing rates. So things like true ROI, and we're also open to the idea of maybe using the same governance system to allow people to vote on some of the investments that we make in the future, especially if we come across multiple opportunities. So we have the option to invest in, let's say, 5 projects, and we want to put up funds to invest in 2 of them. We may allow the community to vote using their glava to decide which investment is preferred.
Okay, yeah, it's fairly close to what we want to do at one, where for the investments it's either the governance council, which is elected by the community, who makes a decision, and if it's a lot of money, then we want the community itself to vote on it.
Right.
And do you, you mentioned that there is some seed funding, which I think is always fairly high risk. You also mentioned Curve with stablecoins, so this is low risk. Do you have some kind of allocation for your portfolio towards more or less more risk, or lower risk?
So right now, 50% of our treasury will be going towards the private seed level investments. 25% will be going towards the sister projects, and the remaining portion will be going to some of the more conservative investments. But as I said before, but because we're not making all of our private investments at once, whatever money is that's been set aside for those investments will be put to use by being used in Curve and other low risk yield farming platforms, just so that we're still earning a return until those actual investments are made.
Okay, and do you compound, or let's say that you invest maybe 20K in a project. How much are you going to use to future investments, and how much of that is going to go towards the node holders?
So around 60% will be going towards node holders. 40% will be held by the treasury, which will then, take profits in the future as vesting kicks in for that particular investment. and the money that's made by the treasury from that 40% will then be reinvested in future private investments and potentially other sister projects.
Yeah, it sounds like a very reasonable ratio. I mean, that allows you to kind of have a growing treasury with a long-term vision, and at the same time still delivering some quite good rewards to your investors. It's nice.
Yep.
Okay. Is there something else that you want to address?
I think we touched on most things. Larry, is there anything that you wanted to add?
I think you pretty much covered everything, yeah. I mean, we've been through the seed investments, the sister projects. That's the sort of main focus of our protocol. So, yeah, I think we've covered everything. If you didn't have any more questions for us.
Yeah, do you guys have some questions? I mean, the community, of course. Let's see, okay. NFTs. Do you guys do some NFTs?
Yeah, we actually have offered, or we have booster NFTs. We have 3 different tiers. We have the first one provides a 5% boost. The second one provides a 10% boost, and the 15% provides a 15% boost on the rewards that a user receives, as well as the actual node that corresponds to that particular tier. And so one additional, I guess, utility that we've added to the NFT is we're basically allowing users to participate in the investments we're making on top of what they're already receiving just from holding nodes. So if you hold the NFT, you'll be able to make an additional investment in these seed level projects on top of what you're already receiving. And the amount that you're able to invest will depend on which tier NFT that you hold.
Okay, well, that's interesting especially for the bigger investors, I suppose.
Yeah.
And One Direction is asking if there is another kind of or another NFT that is being developed. Is it the one, or is it another one?
Another one.
Yeah, he's asking if there is another NFT that is being developed. So I don't know if this is the one that you just discussed, or is there going to be?
So we have so the one I just described now is our booster NFT, but we've also, we also may roll out another NFT for Fusion, which is what allows people to upgrade their nodes by combining the lower tier nodes into higher ones. But we're sort of on the fence if an NFT is necessary in that case, because you could just have a cooldown period and require people to first compound the lower tier into the tier that's immediately above that one, and then use that, and then essentially, like, instead of allowing people to take the lowest tier nodes and combine into the highest tier nodes directly, they would have to go to the intermediate one first and then to the highest one, and then you can also have a cooldown period associated with the actual fusions, and that would just be to increase sustainability, because if you have people always fusing the lower tier nodes into the highest ones, that that can raise the emissions rate pretty quickly, so that wouldn't be ideal, obviously. But yeah, the NFT would just be another thing there that users may need to purchase in order to actually fuse their NFTs.
Okay. And yeah, speaking about the emissions regulation, and I suppose that it's related to price. One Direction is asking if you will implement a solution that would stabilize the price, like Horde is doing their liquidity management solution. He wants to know if you intend to use it or something similar.
Yeah, so that's something that we've been discussing internally. we've been looking at possibly deploying a liquidity manager, but the issue is, and again, this is still an issue that Horde will eventually face down the line, is that the actual reserves for the liquidity manager depends on new buyers coming in, because after a certain point, once the number of sells outweighs the number of buys, then it's just a matter of time before the reserves are completely depleted, and then the liquidity manager model doesn't really work anymore. So if anything, it's not really a permanent solution, but it is something that we're looking into implementing. But I think everyone should just be aware that the price stabilization will only last as long as the reserves actually last.
Yeah, and it's quite funny because we do see some visuals or some images on Twitter about the price that is stable indeed, but there are no images being shared about the reserves, which is kind of more important than the stable price, because if the APR is 1% or so, you take 100 days to get your return on investment. So we need to know how big the reserves are to know if the price will stay stable or not.
Exactly.
And one direction is saying that instead of using the treasury to support the liquidity management solution, you could use the investments airdrop to support it rather than giving it to the investors.
I'm not sure that would be. I don't know how well that would fit in with our vision, because like I said, the idea for us is to get to a point where Lava as a reward is pretty much phased out entirely, and the rewards are only coming from the productive investments that we're making. So that's our private investments as well as our sister projects. So at that point, there isn't a need for a liquidity manager, because people aren't taking profits in the form of a native token, but rather the actual assets that the treasury is investing in. And so in phase 3 that wouldn't really be needed, but I do see his point. But on the other hand, I think that many community members are excited about the possibility of receiving these private investments, and I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but I know that many people would prefer to be receiving those rather than having those investments be sold to then prop up the price of Lava, which is eventually going to be phased out anyway.
Yeah, and I also think that what makes an investor want to invest in Lava is also because one of your marketing points is that you give the investors an entry point into those private sales. So yeah, I do understand that an investor would prefer to have those type of tokens. And also, if you use your treasury to support the price of your native token, this money is some money that you cannot use to invest. So you kind of have a choice to make here.
No, exactly. It is doable, but like I said, it's only a matter of time before the reserves get depleted, unless you're constantly bringing in new buyers. And at the end of the day, the liquidity manager model still relies, on Ponzonomics, and relies on, and it sort of depends on new buyers coming in, regardless. So.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it is a step in the right direction, but it is still some kind of Ponzonomics. And MetaMerdin is asking, so Lava will get phased out eventually. Do we need to do anything for when that happens? Do you need to sell your Lava tokens? Do you need to swap it or anything?
No. It'll be a natural progression. When we say phased out, it's not going to be abrupt where, we won't be pulling liquidity of Lava and saying, make it untradeable. Essentially, all that means is that the rewards that people will be receiving will be coming less from Lava and more from the actual private investments. So it'll decay over time as the actual, I guess, profits or return for the private investments begin to make up a greater portion of the total return for each user.
Okay. So yeah, the user doesn't have anything to do. You manage everything, and all the investor needs to do is to not sell the node.
Yeah.
All right. Metamiadin is asking another question. He's writing it at the moment. Let's just give him a few seconds.
Sure.
When is the marketplace going to launch?
So the actual contracts for the marketplace are already developed. Right now, we're just waiting on our front end dev to add that section to the actual dApp. So we're hoping that the marketplace will be up and running, sometime this month. I would say probably closer to the towards the end of the month. But yeah, the contracts are all done, and it's just a matter of getting the front end up. So you can expect it to be released, I would say, this month.
Okay. Do you have some already some partnerships lined up for to sell to sell NFTs on your marketplace?
What do you? I just want to make sure I understand your question. What kind of partner?
I mean, do you already know what is going to be sold or traded on your marketplace?
Yeah, so it's going to be an internal marketplace. It'll only be for our project's NFTs.
Okay.
And it'll just be it'll be a place for people to buy and sell the actual boosters NFTs and potentially the actual nodes themselves later down the line. But yeah, it's not going to be a general NFT marketplace. It has very specific purpose.
All right. When is Larry gonna get doxxed?
I don't mind doxing. I got no problem with that.
But okay, it's something that you need to see internally. We're not going to answer that here and now. We're not in visual anyway.
I know he just wants to Photoshop my face onto something. It's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not taking responsibility for that. If you were using Hold's liquidity management system, would it be as efficient as it is for them to stabilize the price? And how would it look like if you were to implement it at Lava?
No, it would not be as efficient because they implemented theirs from the beginning. So they were able to actually, benefit from the massive buy pressure that they had and that all projects have at launch time. So when they first launched, they were able to, I would assume, set aside a significant portion of the actual buy volume that they had on that first day or first couple of days to actually top up the reserves. Now for us, because the rate of new buyers has slowed down pretty significantly, we wouldn't have that same sort of buy pressure that you see when you first launch. So I would say it probably wouldn't be as effective. Now that isn't to say that you can't do it. It's just that the reserves probably won't last, as long if you're just doing it now.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. They would have pumped and dumped, but instead of it, they put the money aside from the pump to kind of negate the dump as long as possible, at least.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I feel that this has been fairly comprehensive, unless you want to add anything to it.
I think we just about touched on everything. But if there are any more last-minute questions, I'm more than willing to address them. Or if you have anything that you want to add, let me know. But yeah, I mean, if there isn't anything else, then I think we can wrap it up soon.
Yeah, just want to say that if Larry's face is photoshopped by One Direction, we will share it. But apart from that, it's going to be, it's been to be. Sorry, my English is really bad tonight. It has been a pleasure to host you. I've been looking forward to it for quite some time now, and I really like what you're doing at Lava Financial, and even more so that now that I know more about what you're doing and where you are headed. So yeah, I'm looking forward to keep in touch with you guys.
Definitely. Thank you for having us on today. We appreciate it, and hopefully we can continue to work together in the future in some capacity.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks
Take
for having
care,
us. It
everyone.
was good talking to you.
Take care. Goodbye.
Take care. Bye now.